Masechet Ketubot, Daf Yod Zayin. We begin with a famous baraita about making the bride happy. Tenura banan kesad merakedin lifnei hakala. How does one dance before the bride? Doesn't mean literally what kind of dance moves. It means what kind of praise does one sing before the bride. Bet Shammai omerim. Kala kemot shehi, ubet Hillel omrim kala na'a v'chasuda. Bet Shammai says you should praise her as she is. Everybody has some good quality, so find something, some quality to praise her. But you have to say it like it is. You have to tell the exact truth. Bet Hillel says, no, you always say a beautiful and attractive bride, no matter what. No matter what she looks like, no matter what the situation, you always say the nicest praise. Amru lahen bet Shammai lebet Hillel. Hareh she'ayta chigeret o soma omrim la kala na'a v'chasuda. Bet Shammai then challenge Bet Hillel, and they say, what if she is lame or blind? Would you still say that she is beautiful and attractive? If she's not, then you're lying. Torah amra midebar sheket tirchak says, stay away from false matters. So Bet Shammai says, you got to stick to the truth. You're not allowed to lie. אמרו להם בית הלל לבית שמאי, לדבריכם, מי שלקח מקח רע מן השוק, ישבחנו בעיניו או יגננו בעיניו. So Bet Hillel says, according to you, you always have to tell the truth. Let's say someone went to the marketplace and they bought something and they got a bad deal. Should you go to them and said, oh, what a terrible deal you got. This furniture you got, the worst quality, terrible. You make the person feel bad? Or you should say, oh, very nice, a nice item that you got. He bought it already. If he didn't buy it yet, then obviously you tell him this is probably not a good deal. Doesn't look good. Don't buy it. But if you bought it already, then make the person feel better. And that's more important than giving the 100% all the truth. You have to care about the person's feelings. Obviously, you should find some way to praise it since he bought it already. And the same thing here, he got married, right? If he's didn't get married yet, he's going out. What do you think? Should I go out with her? Should I marry her? Then you can tell the truth. But if they're already married, already at the wedding, so make the groom feel good and say nice things. The nicest things. Okay, מכאן אמרו חכמים לעולם תהא דעתו של אדם מעורבת עם הבריות. The sages learned from Bet Hillel that a person should always be involved in, this is a good translation, empathetic with mankind and treat everybody courteously. In this case also, think about the groom's feelings. He wants to be happy this day. So if everybody comes and says, wow, this is the most beautiful bride, then that will make him feel happy at his wedding day. And don't just give a half compliment like, oh, she's just all right, like Bet Shammai would do. Then he's going to feel bad. Good. כי אתה רב דימי אמר, הכי משרו קמא כלתה במערבה. Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, and he said, in Eretz Yisrael, this is what people would say to the bride. Lo kechal, lo serak, lo pirkus, ve'alatchen. They would say, this bride, she doesn't need anything. She doesn't, even if without eyeshadow, without rouge, without braiding her hair, she's still going to be the height of beauty. Translated here as like a graceful ibex. Try calling your wife an ibex, telling your wife that she looks like an ibex, and see how well that goes over. Okay, ki samchu rabbanan Rabbi Zera, sharu lehachi, lo kechal velo serak velo pirkus ve'alatchen. When the sages ordained Rabbi Zera, and they made him a rabbi, also they had, when someone got semicha, also they had a celebration and people would sing and praise the person. And so they also said about him the same phrase, even without eyeshadow, rouge, braiding of the hair, and yet like a graceful ibex, even though it's metaphorically, but the point is that just like a bride comes and she is, we want to make her feel happy and make the groom feel happy, so too this student is now learned a lot of Torah, and so therefore is graduating. So it's as happy like a wedding ceremony, and therefore we borrow the same song that we sing at wedding ceremonies, even though the content does not literally apply. Ki samchu Rabbanan l'Rabbi Ameh u'Rabbi Aseh sharu lehu hachi. Now that you mentioned the songs that people would say at semicha parties, so we mentioned another one when the sages gave ordination to Rabbi Ameh Rabbi Aseh. They sang as follows: Kol min den v'chol min den semochu lana. This is anyone that's like this sage or that sage, you should give them semicha. These are appropriate models for everyone. That they've reached a high level. Lo tismochu lana, lo min sarmisin, velo min sarmitin. But do not give semicha to people who are corrupt or people that are worthless. These are hard words, a lot of different interpretations about what they mean, but something negative. V'amrila, others have a different version. Lo min hamisin velo min turmisin. Not from the fifth ones, meaning the people that only know a fifth of Torah. They give you a fifth, 20% of an answer. They're not worthy. Or people turmusin means incomplete. It may come from Latin, meaning which is a Roman coin worth a third of a dinar. So these are very little amount. These students who have are almost worthless in their competence, so they should not get semicha. Okay, but these students, Rabbi Ameh, Rabbi Aseh, they deserve it. Rabbi Abhu ki avat ateh mimetibta lebe kesar nafkan amahata lebe kesar leapeh. Other praises of sages when Rabbi Abhu would come to the house of the emperor. He lived in Caesarea. Caesarea was where the seat of the Roman government in the land of Israel. And so Rabbi Abhu lived there, and he was he had a close relationship with the emperor. And so whenever he would come leave the Bet Midrash and come to the house of the emperor, the maidservants would come out to greet him, and give him honor, and they would sing, Rabba de Ameh, Umad Barna de Umate, Busina din Hora, Berich Matiach, Lishlam. They would say to him, Master of his people, leader of the nation, he's a candle of illumination. Blessed is your arrival in peace. Okay, that would be fun to be there and see that scene of the maidservants of the emperor praising this rabbi who came. Amru alav al Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai shaya notel bad shel hadas umrakel lifnei hakala. Back to brides, we're going to describe how different sages would actually dance. Now, this is not just about what they said, but also the physical dancing. That Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai would take a myrtle branch, and dance in front of the bride, and he would say, Kala na'ava chasuda, beautiful and attractive bride. Myrtle branches were symbolic of weddings. So that was appropriate. Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak meraked atelat. Shmuel bar Yitzchak, second generation Amorah, he would dance with 3 myrtles. Apparently he would juggle them or something. Amar Rabbi Zera, kamachsif lan sabah. But he was criticized by Rabbi Zera, who said that this old man, he's humiliating us. He stands for Torah, and he's doing some kind of silly dances, look like a clown. And so it's not appropriate for his age and sagacity. However, when this Rav Shmuel, the one who was dancing, died, then there came a pillar of fire that descended, that separated between him and everyone else, saying no one is on his level. He was beyond. And we learned that there's only 1 or 2 people in every generation that have this merit, this high level, that you have a pillar of fire and saying everyone else is on one side. This sage is qualitatively greater, so he's on the other side, meaning that Rabbi Zera was not correct in demeaning him in this way. Amar Rabbi Zera, anahya le shotita le sabah. Rabbi Zera realized that he spoke too soon, and so he said, "Oh, this branch shotite means branch was effective for the old man." In other words, it's precisely not despite this crazy dance that he made, but because of it, because he made this crazy dance, that he fulfilled the mitzvah of making the bride and the groom happy, and he went the extra mile to do that. It's actually because of that that he became, he deserved this great appellation of having this great pillar of fire. Other versions of Rabbi Zera's statement is not that shotite meaning branch, but amrali shitute l'saba, his nonsense. He looked like he was acting like a clown, but that itself made everybody laugh and everybody happy. That was a good thing. Others say his method, that he used to act in this way, that is what gave him the merit. And so, therefore, despite the criticism, Rabbi Zera learned now that it's appropriate for a sage even to act in an unusual, unbecoming way, if it brings joy to the groom and the bride. Another unusual action, Rav Acha would take the bride and put her on his shoulders and dance with her. So like what we do for bar mitzvah kids. But to do this to a bride, is that appropriate for a man, a rabbi, to have a bride on his shoulders? So the other rabbi said, how about us? Can we do the same thing? Should we model after Rav Acha and also dance with the bride like that? Amar lehu idam yanalaichu kikashora lehaye v'ila. Says, if the bride seems to you just like a beam, meaning you feel no attraction at all, then okay, fine, you can do it. And Rav Acha, he was able to concentrate just on making the bride happy, and he felt no physical attraction. So then fine, you can. But if not, then not. His idea is that only Rav Acha could do this. Most other people cannot have such concentration, and therefore it will be inappropriate. I have till today some interesting customs in Hasidic communities. The Rebbe will hold a handkerchief and dance with the bride, things like that. So there are things that usually we wouldn't do, but there are some customs where, to make the bride happy, at least in that case, the rabbis do. Amar Rabbi Shemuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonatan, mutar listakel b'fnei hakala kol shiv'a kedei lechabeba al ba'ala. Another exception. Usually, you're not allowed to look at a woman at her beauty, but Rabbi Yonatan says, kala, for 7 days, one is permitted to look at her beauty, because when the groom sees, oh, look, everyone's is noticing how beautiful my bride is, then he will love her even more, knowing that she's so beautiful, and everybody else considers her beautiful, so he will be even more attracted to her. However, the halacha is not in accordance with Rabbi Yonatan, and therefore even a bride is not appropriate to look at her beauty. Tenor Rabbanan ma'avirin et hamet milifnei hakala. And now, interesting case where we have on the same road a funeral procession and a wedding procession. And we saw already there's so many parallels between the two, and both of them are public acts, and people join together to give comfort to the mourners and also to give joy to the bride. Well, what if they are directly head-on, one against the other? So if you have it on the same road, let's say they're coming each from in a different direction, and the road is narrow, who should pass first and who should move to the side? So the answer is that the funeral procession moves over to the side and yields before the bride. In other words, even though both are important, the beginning of a new life together, a bride happiness is greater than sadness. And so the dead have to wait on the side. But both of them, if there's a king also has a procession. If a king is coming and on the other way there's either a bride or a funeral procession, they have to wait and let the king pass by. Amru alav al Agrippa samelach shavar mifnei hakala v'shibechu chachamim. However, an exception, King Agrippa, he was Agrippa the first, a grandson of Herod the Great. Here is a coin with a face on it. It's a bit unusual to have a Jewish coin with a face on it. This is, in modern Israel, no coins have faces on them. Dollar bills have faces of the Jewish leaders on them, but not coins. In ancient times, the Chashmonaim also did not put faces on coins because of a prohibition of depicting a person. However, this is an unusual exception. Agrippa did so, but in general, Agrippa did have a good relationship with the rabbis, and they often praise him. And here they praised him because when the king was coming one way, he stood to the side and yielded to a bride, even though he didn't have to, because the law is that the king goes first. So this was a nice thing that he did. Now Gemara asks, if they praised him, that means he did a good thing, but is this really a good thing? Rav Asher taught that even according to one who says that a Nasi was the patriarch, like Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, he is the political head of the Jewish community in Israel, answerable to the Romans. So he has a very high authority. When there was no kings, he would be the highest authority. But a Nasi, according to this opinion, can relinquish his honor. He was supposed to honor him, but if he says, okay, you could sit in my seat, he can relinquish his honor. Even according to that opinion, a king does not have a right to relinquish his own honor, because king is even higher status, and a king is not, if he's relinquishing his honor, it's not relinquishing just his own personal honor, but he represents the whole nation, and by him demeaning himself, he is in a way demeaning the whole nation itself. Remember, President Carter used to like to pull his own suitcases. He says even though he's president, he doesn't want to have make other people work for him. He wanted to show he's a regular man of the people, and so he would carry his own suitcases when he traveled. But people criticized him and said, "It's not you yourself. You're representing the United States of America. What kind of great leader is this that you're hauling your own suitcases?" Okay, so this would be the same thing, that a king should not, and therefore, maybe why did they praise Agrippas? They should have criticized him because he is not allowed to relinquish on his honor. Tamar Mor, som tasim alecha melech, sheteh emato alecha. And we learn this from Pasuk that says, you put a king upon yourself, that is all should be upon you. That's important, and therefore he should not relinquish his honor. And their answer is, Parashat Terachim Havai. It was at a crossroads. In other words, it wasn't that they were coming head on, and then the king went off to the side into the gutter so that the bride should pass through. That would be very embarrassing, shameful for the king. But rather, it was at a crossroads, and so therefore, the king was able to just slow down so that the bride would go. It was not obvious to onlookers that the king was doing something against his honor. Rather, the king was just, he could turn and do something that would allow the bride to go, even without diminishing from the king's own honor. Okay, Tenor Banan, Mebatelin Tamud Torah La'asos Atamet Ulachnasat Kala. And so again, more comparisons between these two processions, and the honor. We just talked about the honor of a king. Now talk about the honor of a sage and those learning Torah. And the law is one should stop learning Torah in order to help take the dead out of the city. In other words, to join the procession of the funeral from the city to the cemetery, or to bring in a kala. Interesting, the hotza'ah and haknasa. You take the dead out, but you bring a kala in. They would march the bride from her father's house to the chuppah. So these are so important that you stop even learning Torah to go and join. Amru alav al Rabbi Yehuda b'Rabbi Elai shayam vatel tamud Torah lotzat hamet ulachnasat kala. And in fact, Rabbi Yehuda b'Rabbi Elai, who we just saw above, he would stop learning Torah both for a funeral procession and for a wedding. However, there's a limitation. When is this true that you stop learning Torah? When there are not enough people to satisfy all his needs. If you need someone to take care of the dead, to do something, or at a wedding to be there, to give honor, then you stop. But if they have everything they need, they have enough people to give them the proper honor, right? They already have lots of people, and so one more is not needed, then stay and study Torah. So you don't have to go to every single wedding that you hear about, only where it's important for you to be there. Okay, v'kama kol sorko. Now, how much is sufficient? Amar Rav Shemuel bar Ini mishmed Rav Teresar alfe gavre v'shita alfe shipure. Well, some number is quite a lot. You thought we had big weddings. or actually funerals. So they said you need 12,000 men and another 6,000 to blow the shofar at a funeral procession. So if you have 18,000 people there, that's a proper honor. If you already have that, then you don't need more and you can stay studying Torah. But until you have 18,000, you should go also. Some say, no, 12,000, 13,000 altogether, 6,000 of them learn to blow a shofar, 7,000 to go and walk together. All right, so that's a little bit less. Ula amar kegon de haise gabre me'abula ve'ad sichra. Ula has another measurement that the procession should stretch from the gate of the city all the way until the cemetery. That when you'd go, you'd see that the line goes all the way and connects that whole place. So depending on how far the cemetery is from the city, it might be more or might be less. Rav Sheshat v'itema Rabbi Yochanan amar netilata kenetinataha. Ma netinata b'shishim ribo, af netilata b'shishim ribo. So Rav Sheshat named Rabbi Yochanan says even more, if it's a Torah scholar, then just like Torah was given with 600,000 men there, so too if it's taken away, and when a sage dies, then the Torah is gone, is taken away. So we should honor the Torah, who's the sage, who's a living Torah, also with 600,000 people. So that's how many you need. This was probably very theoretical back then, but nowadays, when several of the Gedolei Hador in past years have died, there were hundreds of thousands of people in Jerusalem at their funerals. So if you could go and count and they say 600,000 people are there, then you could stay and study Torah and you don't have to go. However, all this that we just said, these limits are for someone who learned Tanakh and Mishnah. I mean, anyone who's proficient in Tanakh and Mishnah, they deserve these numbers of the 18,000, 13,000, 600,000. But someone who teaches others, then there's no limit to that. So I take back what I said. If Gadol Hador, anyone who teaches Torah publicly, dies, everyone has to go, stop learning Torah, and go and honor the Torah that they taught. Okay, v'im yesh ayedim. So that's the end of that section. Now, we mentioned im yesh ayedim sheyatzta behinuma. The woman who she lost her ketubah. We're trying to figure out, was she a betula, deserves 200 or not? If there are witnesses that she was wearing a hinuma when she went in the wedding procession, then that shows she was a betula. My hinuma. What is this hinuma? A couple of opinions. Surha bar papa mishmeh de zairi amar tanura de asa. Rabbi Yochanan amar kerita dem namnema ba kalita. So one opinion says it's like an oven made of myrtles. Not an oven, but rather, since an oven is a shape like a helmet, so this is some kind of helmet or canopy or hat that is made out of myrtles. Again, myrtles symbolizing marriage. So this was some kind of tiara made out of myrtles that only a betula would wear. And other people say kirita, so this maybe means a veil, that under which the bride dozes off. In other words, she has a veil, and this veil would be so thick that she can't see anything and people can't see her, so it's dark under there, so that makes her fall asleep all the time. So I think this is pretty funny. Okay, kirita also can maybe be like kiriya, meaning a city. And, we know from the famous story of Rabbi Akiva and his wife, where they have a city of gold. So this was also a custom. There's a Roman statue of someone wearing a tiara in the shape of a city. When we call it, say, Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, that would be the city of Jerusalem made out of gold. And this would be a tiara or crown that was the shape of a city. So this was a popular ornament back then. Seems it be kind of a little heavy nowadays and give someone a headache. But anyway, that could also be what it means. So it's the hinuma is some kind of head dress that only a betula would wear. Rabbi Yochanan ben Beraka Omer. He said that if the Edim remembers that they distributed roasted grain, then they only do that for a bitula, and she gets 200. Tana bihuda re'aya bevavel mai. So this is true. In Judea, they had this custom, and they only gave out this dessert for a betula. Paraben Bavel, what was their custom? Amarav darduge de mishcha areshad rabanan. Oh, in Bavel they had a different custom. When there was a wedding of a betula, the people would smear oil on the heads of the sages. This was a nice thing. The sages come and they get this nice oil rub in their hair. It was considered luxury. And then everybody was happy because of that. So this is a bit strange. What are you talking about? Did they all need a shampoo? Right? Because for him, the only time you put oil in your hair is if you're going to the bathhouse, and this is part of the cleansing process. So it'd be kind of strange at a wedding, all of a sudden people are getting shampoo and conditioner in their hair. So the papa was not accustomed to this. He never saw it. He was curious about it. Amaleh, Abaye says to him, Yatma, oh, what are you, an orphan? La avda lach imach. When you got married, didn't your mother do the smearing of the oil on the heads of the sages at your own wedding, right? Or are you an orphan that you don't have a mother to do that? Which means that it would be the mother that would do this smearing on the heads of the sages. Extra unusual. Okay, a lot of unusual things that were done at weddings. So he says, didn't you have this at your wedding? I guess you must be an orphan. He doesn't mean literally, but he didn't have it. And in fact, this was done once when one of the sages who had his son marry a daughter of Rabba Bar Ula. Or some say it was Rabba Bar Ula who had his son marry into one of the sages. One or the other, there was a wedding, and they did this. And he smeared oil on the heads of the sages at the time of the wedding. And so in Bavel, this was only done for Betula. And so if people remember, oh yeah, they did the oil smearing, I remember that, then we can assume that the bride was a Betula. Al-Mal Tamai. Now, how about a wedding of a widow, or say any second marriage? Tanat of Yosef, Al-Mata letla kisane. Yosef taught, no, the roasted grains were not given out at the wedding of an almana. And so that's how we know to distinguish the one and the other. That concludes that section. One note for halacha is that regarding how many people should attend a funeral, if a person is not learned and does not know Tanakh and Mishnah, then the halacha requires just 10 people to be at the funeral, and also notes that nowadays there are different burial societies, and so we assume that the chevra of each place or community will take care of that deceased person, and so one group does not have to go out to the funeral of another. So that's how that applies nowadays. All right, now we go to the next part of the Mishnah, part B of the Mishnah, which had nothing to do with the bride and groom, but rather about a field, and it happened to be a case where Rabbi Yoshua agreed to Rabban Gamliel that we will say that there's a migo. If a person is sitting on a field, Mr. A sitting on the field, B comes and says, hey, that's my field. If A could say, no, it's my field, go away, you bring proof, and he'd be believed. Therefore, if he says, it was your father's field, but I bought it from him, then he's also believed, because he could have just said, no, it's just mine. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to ask. Question is, why does the Mishnah have to give a case where A says it was your father's field and I bought it from your father? Why not make a simpler case that, yes, it was yours, but I bought it from you, Mr. B, right? Why do you have to involve a father? Mishum de and the answer is because of the end of that law. If there are witnesses that in fact say that it belonged to the father of B, then, and he says, oh yeah, but I bought it from him, he's not believed because there's no migo. He have to say, if B comes and says, this is my field, I have proof that it belonged to my father, then A is going to have to bring some way of some proof that he in fact bought it. He's not going to just be believed to say I bought it. He has to show the receipt. And so therefore, so for the sefa, how could you have a case where the witnesses will come and say it belonged to A, only in the case where it belonged to A's father? All right, we're still going to have to clarify because it's not so clear what the difference is. So here's why. Now, what exactly are the circumstances that we're talking about that A comes and says it belonged to my father as opposed to belong to me, and therefore B says it belonged to my father, belonged to me, and therefore A cannot say that no, I bought it from you. He has to bring proof because he does not have migo. So what's the case? Meaning, how long did A live on the land? If A was on the property for 3 years or more, then that is called a chazakah, presumptive ownership. That's the halacha. If I buy a field from you, I have to hold on to the document, of sale, to prove that it's mine, the deed. I have to hold on it. How long do I have to hold on it? Forever? If I ever lose it, then anyone can come and take it back? That wouldn't make sense. So therefore, the law is for 3 years, because the presumption is, if I came and just squatted on someone's property it could be for a while, for a month or two, but at some point, the proper owner, if he's the proper owner, should come and say, hey, you're squatting on my property, and he's go to court and say, this is my land, kick that guy out. So we assume, we give the true property owner 3 years. If no one shows up in 3 years to claim back the property, then that means that there is no other owner. The person living there has the chazakah, squatter's rights. Okay, good. So that's the halacha. So if A is there for 3 years, then he doesn't need to bring any proof. Even if someone else comes and says, yeah, once upon a time it belonged to my family, it doesn't matter. If it belonged to you, why didn't you make a claim in the past 3 years? So it can't be that. And if A is there for less than 3 years, then obviously he's not deemed credible. If the previous owner comes and says, this was mine, so you don't have your document of sale, less than 3 years, so then he's not going to be believed, no matter what. So it can't be talking about, so what is the case? Therefore, it can't be a case where B says it belonged to me, because if B says it belonged to me and A says I bought it from you, and we know that if that was in fact it did belong to B, then it does not depend on witnesses or not. It only depends on A. Either he has chazakah, then he can stay, or if he has a deed, but in this case he doesn't have a deed. And if it's less than 3 years, then we don't believe him, and then it goes to B. So it'll be a simple case. All right, so that's why it can't be that B makes the claim that it belonged to me, or it can't be that the Mishnah could not bring a case where A says, it belonged to you, but I bought it. He has to say it belonged to the father. Now, how does being belong to the father make it any better? If the same thing will be with the father, have the same question. If A has a chazakah, he was there for 3 years, then why wouldn't you believe him? No matter what, he just says it's mine. Look, I'm here for 3 years. No one contested. That's mine. And if it's less than 3 years, also we do not deem him credible. So how is this any better? Why is this case more interesting? Where he says it was your father's. So here's as follows. If the case is talking about the father, which the Mishnah actually is, then you can have a circumstance where we will believe him even without a full chazakah. For example, if A was living on the field for 2 years in the lifetime of the father, and the father still didn't protest, but that's not a full chazakah. Then the father dies, and now it goes to the son, and the son is a child. A child, he's not aware yet of the field, the property of his father. He doesn't know that he should come and file a protest in the court. And so therefore, the chazakah, even though A is there for more than 3 years, he still doesn't gain a chazakah. And that's the case that would make sense that we're talking about, where where he would have to bring something. He would have to have amigo in order to keep the land. Otherwise, without that, we wouldn't believe him, because although he is there for more than 3 years, that still does not maintain a chazakah. Now, Rav Huna said we do not establish a chazakah for a property of a minor, even after he became an adult, right? So as long as he's a minor, he doesn't know, and so we only start the chazakah after he's an adult, and so therefore this would be a case that makes sense. So this answers the question. The Mishnah could not have talked about a case where A says it belonged to you, but I bought it. Because if he says, but I belong to you and I bought it, then it would all depend on, if he's there more than 3 years, we believe him no matter what. Less than 3 years, then we don't believe him no matter what. So it has to be a case like this, where it belonged to the father and the chazakah was not fully finished. Okay, Rav Huna matitin atala ashmoinan. Now, Rav Huna tells us this rule, that when a property is owned by a child, then we do not count those years towards the chazakah. But now we just said that the Mishnah is talking about that case. So we know this from the Mishnah, because that's the only case that the Mishnah would make sense. So why does Rav Huna need to teach us this if we know it from the Mishnah? Okay, we didn't know this to begin with. We just learned it from Rav Huna. But now that we know that that's the only interpretation of the Mishnah, now why do we need Rav Huna anymore? It could be Rav Huna is actually explaining to us this inference from the Mishnah. It's really not really very obvious from the Mishnah, so he's explaining the Mishnah. So that's helpful. Thank you. Or maybe he's teaching us that even when the minor becomes an adult, still, we do not count the years before when the minor becomes an adult, but rather we start the clock again. So that I would have thought, without Rav Huna, that let's say the A is squatting on the field for 2 years when the father's alive, and then the father dies, the kid's child. Okay, so you wait till he's adult. Maybe when he's adult, I would have thought that you count just one more year. That's what the Mishnah still would make sense in that case. So Rav Huna comes teach us that no, even when he becomes an adult, you start the 3 years again. When the minor is 13, then you start 3 years, and there's no chazakah until that child becomes 16. And so that's what Rav Huna was teaching us. Okay, good. Now, v'litniye bedideh v'lukma kegon shachala shetayim befanav v'achat shelo befanav uchron shebarach. Hold on. We're looking for a case where the person A was there for 3 years, but didn't get a chazakah. That's what we're looking for, right? Because if it's a regular case of I say I bought it from you, and then if I was there 3 years, I don't have to bring any proof at all. I don't have to say anything. If it was less than 3 years, then I have no migo, because I can't just be quiet. I can't. I have to prove that I'm there. So we're looking for a case where I was more than 3 years, but no migo established. So yeah, a case could be where I say it was your father's, and that way your father had it for 2 years, and then you had it. But we can have a Mishnah, we can construct a case regarding just B himself forgetting the father. For example, if A sat on the field for 2 years while B was around, but then on the 3rd year, for example, B ran away and he wasn't around. So since he wasn't around, he couldn't have filed a protest. And so therefore, the chazakah does not get fulfilled. So now, if so, barach mechamat mai, it depends why he ran away. Either barach mechamat nefashot, peshita de lo meheman, de lo maseh mache. If he ran away because B ran away because he was scared for his life. Maybe the government or someone threatened his life. He had to run away and go into hiding. Well, then there's no chazakah, because there's no possibility that B could have protested. If there's a warrant out for his capital punishment, and then he would go to a local court, then he would be found and killed. So he had to go into hiding, and therefore he didn't not protest because the field wasn't his, he didn't protest because he was afraid for his life. But really, he wanted to protest. So in that case, there would be no proof, there would be no chazakah. And if he ran away because he owed someone money, okay, so he's running away from creditors, but still, wherever he goes to, so the creditors are local. They're not gonna, they're gonna find him if he's in the city. But if he goes away to a more distant city, then the creditors are not gonna run after him. So if so, in the city where he goes to, he should have protested in the court there. And that would be sufficient. The fact that he didn't means it's not a chazakah. Sorry, the fact that he didn't shows that he doesn't claim the land, and therefore I do establish a chazakah. So in other words, either it's for his life and there's no chazakah, or it's because of creditors, and then there would be a chazakah because he could have protested in the other land and he didn't. And we have a general rule that says a protest, even if it's not in front of him, not in the same place as where the field is considered a legitimate protest, because eventually, that court will issue a proclamation, this person protested, and the news will travel back to the squatter to say, hey, you have to prove, hold on to your deed because someone has protested. Okay, now how do we know this rule that a protest, even in a different place, is considered a protest? From this Mishnah in Baba Batra. Titnan shalosh arasot chazakah. There are 3 zones regarding chazakah, 3 lands. Yehuda ve'Eber HaYarden ve'Galil. Judea, the south. Eber Yarden, the other side of the Jordan, Transjordan, and the Galilee. Haya bihuda vechazik be'Galil. Be'Galil vechazik bihuda. Ena chazakah. If the true landowner was in Judea, but the person squatting was squatted on land in the Galilee, or the other way around, then that even if it's after 3 years, it's not a chazakah. Presumption is because there will be no travel between them, and the message would not get across, and so we can't expect someone in a different zone to protest. And since the reason he didn't protest because he's in a different zone, therefore his lack of protest is not a proof that the squatter is the owner. But they have to be in the same country. Okay, now that Mishnah, we analyzed it and we said, if you can make a protest not in front of the person, then what's the difference? Maybe if it's in 2 countries. And if you think a protest in different places is not considered a protest, meaning you have to be there, then even 2 cities within Judea would not be good. And so what's the point of these zones? Okay, so Amar Rabbi Abba Bar Memal leolam kasav macha shelo befanav havya macha'a, and the conclusion that we had when we discussed that Mishnah was, in fact, a protest, even not in the same place, is considered, in fact, a protest. And so, while this Mishnah, then, if you could be in a different place, then how come even Judea and Galilee also you should be able to protest and would be a chazakah? This Mishnah is talking about when there was a crisis period, there was perilous roads, there were enemies out, and people weren't able to travel between the 2 places, and that if he can't travel, then the word's not going to get there, and then the squatter is not going to be aware that he should keep his deed. Okay, but if so, that can't be exactly right. If so, then what's the difference between Judea and the Galilee? Distam Yehuda veGalil keshat chirum damu. We asked that if it's really a time of crisis, then actually you can't travel anywhere, even between one city and the other. So if it's in a different city, then there's no possibility of protesting. So it can't be that the Mishnah is really talking about a time of crisis, but rather it's saying that the actual Mishnah is not talking about a time of crisis, but even in peacetime, being in these 2 different zones is like a time of crisis. So the bottom line is, if it's a time of crisis where there's a war zone and you really can't travel from even one city to another, then if B and A are in different cities, then you don't get a chazakah because there's no possibility of protesting in the other city because the word won't get there. If it's a time of peace, then if he's in the same zone, even if a different city, then he can protest there, and if he doesn't protest, then there is a chazakah. If he's in a different zone, then even in a time of peace, he cannot protest. The word won't get across, and therefore he does not create a chazakah. The bottom line is that if we're talking about a case of B himself, that B says it's mine and A says it was yours, but I bought it, that can't be the case, because then we'll say either you have a chazakah or you don't have a chazakah. And if he ran away in the middle, if he ran away because of his life, then he couldn't have protested, so there's no chazakah. If he ran away because of money and he's in the same zone, then he could have protested, and then there would be a chazakah. So back to square one, that whatever the case is, either B could have protested or could not have protested. Based on that, there is a chazakah, there's no chazakah. If there is a chazakah, A is believed no matter. If no chazakah, A is not believed no matter what. And so we can't have this in-between case that we need for the Mishnah, where we believe him only if he has a migo. That case can be constructed only if he says it was your father's, and I started the chazakah under him, but then he died, and now the child is there, and he has yet to finish a full 3 years, and with the child's chazakah. Baruch Adonai L'olam, Amen v'Amen.